Why do we as humans struggle so much with making decisions? Indecision can be incredibly damaging in a marriage because it keeps us from fully choosing our partner. When one partner chooses us, but we hold back, waiting for them to change or for the right moment to commit, it erodes the relationship. We tell ourselves, I'll choose you once you change X, Y, or Z, instead of stepping fully into the relationship as it is. Living with someone who doesn't truly choose you, who stays stuck in criticism and withholding, tears at the fabric of the relationship and marriage. But here's the truth. Indecision is a fantasy. The reality is not choosing is a choice. Welcome back to another episode of Master Your Marriage. Today, we've added a bonus losing strategy. After we were done recording the first 7 losing strategies, we decided to add this really important one because it's so common in relationships and also really harmful. And this losing strategy is indecisiveness.
Oh man, and do we see this all the time? And, it's interesting because we live in probably, we'll look back and call it the anxiety age, right? An age of heightened anxiety. And everywhere you look, people are more anxious than ever before. They're overscheduled. They're busy. They're constantly worrying. And a lot of this anxiety stems from the pressure to be perfect.
Yeah.
And to have complete control over our lives. We see this with our kids and the difficulties they have with making decisions and needing to feel like they make the right choices and make the perfect decisions. And it's interesting because we live in a time where we have all this technology. We have all these apps that predict the weather, calendars to track our every task, a flood of podcasts and self-help books to help us to become more efficient in our lives, more in control in our lives. But here's what we're often missing. Part of living well means confronting the fact that we are also very human. And as humans, we are defined by our finitude. No matter how hard we try, there's always going to be something limited about us because we're imperfect, because we're human.
Yeah. And being human comes with all sorts of terms and conditions, and we're limited in countless ways. Yet we continue to act as though this isn't a truth.
Right.
We get stuck in fantasies of someday having it all figured out. And then in reality, we realize that day will never come.
That's right.
Ironically, we would have more peace of mind and more comfort and perhaps even more efficiency if we would just accept the truth that we're human and that we're fallible.
Yeah. You'll see how this connects towards the end of this episode. But, I think if we would just allow ourselves more space to admit, you know what, I'm not perfect. I am going to fail. I'm not always going to make the best decisions or stay on top of everything or choose exactly perfectly all the time. If we can admit that, then we can free ourselves from this exhausting pursuit of this unattainable ideal. As we let go of that fantasy, it allows us to be more present with where we are. And it allows us the freedom to say, you know what, let's just do the best we can right now in this moment, in the face of all of our human limitations.
Yeah. If we just give ourselves a little grace,
right?
We extend it to other people when they make mistakes,
Right.
yet we're unwilling to do that for ourselves.
And this has a lot to do with indecisiveness, doesn't it?
Without a doubt. So this pursuit of perfection creates a lot of anxiety around trying to make the right choice. And we get so caught up in, are we making the right decision and avoiding the wrong one? And we end up stuck. We're spinning our wheels and we're often unable to make a decision at all. We're stuck in this analysis paralysis.
Yes. And I'm sure you've probably experienced this yourself. You've experienced decision anxiety in some aspect of your life, in some area of your life.
Yeah, I think we all do.
I don't think I know we all do. And I don't think there's hardly any area of our life where we haven't felt that pressure of decision making. And this indecision impacts our relationships in huge ways. And I could rattle off 100 different examples, but just to name a few ways this impacts relationships. There's the wife who is torn between staying in the marriage for the sake of the kids or getting divorced. There's the couple who had a huge fight. He moved out and now she can't decide whether or not she should let him to come back home or not.
Yeah, that's a bad one.
Right. There's the young couple they've been dating a year or 2 years. She's seen red flags. She's starting to see him more clearly, but she's unsure. Are these things we can work through, or should we just call it quits? Then there's the wife who's struggling to choose her husband because she's not sure she can actually trust him completely. So she convinces herself, I'll choose you when you do this, 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 and that. And then there's even just these seemingly small day-to-day decisions that we make all the time around parenting, consequences for our kids, goals, rituals, chores, can all feel really overwhelming and even paralyzing, like you said, analysis paralysis.
Yeah. And in these situations, we have to confront our finitude once again. And as humans, we can only choose one of the paths in front of us at any one time.
Yeah.
And so we can't stay in the marriage and leave it at the same time.
Right.
We can't both move forward with a potential partner and simultaneously break up with them or pull back. So every decision that we make closes off multiple other paths or areas where we could have gone. And whether we like it or not, this is an unavoidable fact of being human. Even when we make great choices, we're still saying no to other possibilities.
Yeah. And oftentimes either choice we make is going to come with sadness, or it's going to come with grief. It's going to come with loss.
Yeah.
So there's,
always.
Often not this perfect decision that we think is out there. I recently watched an interesting movie series. Maybe you've seen it. It's called Dark Matter. It's on Apple TV, and it's about quantum physics. It's about, it's alternate realities. And it was a fun movie. I watched it with my son. And the premise of it is that every time we make a major decision in life, two realities are created. One in which we live with the choice that we made. And then there's this other reality, an alternate universe that where the alternate version of us lives with the decision that we didn't make. And because we make thousands and thousands of decisions, there's infinite alternate realities. Yeah. There's the alternate reality. I got married, or I didn't get married, or had kids, or I didn't have kids. I took that job across the country, or I didn't. So it's a fun movie, and it's an interesting concept that just highlights, I think, how every decision we're making is constantly shaping our lives.
Yeah. And every decision we don't make.
Yeah, it's a path that we cut off.
Yeah, path that we cut off. And the very thought of all these options, like, oh, should I or shouldn't I, it can feel overwhelming. But to live well, we have to take responsibility for this truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Our finite existence chooses one thing, and we inevitably close the door off to all of the other choices.
Yeah. I was thinking about this concept today as I was preparing a little bit for this episode. And I was thinking back to when I was younger, and I imagined, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we got an RV, we homeschooled the kids, and we traveled all over the country, giving them all these cool experiences and expose them to all these interesting things. And Robert was like, that doesn't sound like fun at all.
No, it didn't sound like fun at all.
And so ultimately we didn't choose that path. And now I know obviously that experience is never going to happen. That's not an experience I'm going to have, or my kids are going to have. And sometimes I feel a little sad, like, oh, there was this alternate reality where we could have done that. And I think that still would have been really fun, because it would have been an amazing adventure. And, our lives are full of these.
Yeah. And I think when we're young, we tend to see like all of the myriad of possibilities out there, and we fantasize about the different paths that we may have or could have chosen. But as we mature and we walk the path we've chosen, we will inevitably close doors on these other paths. And we have to learn how to tolerate sort of this discomfort or the sadness that comes from the path not chosen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is really what causes sometimes people to experience what they call, quote, a midlife crisis.
Could
right?
be, yeah.
Where someone is confronting all the possibilities that they're never going to experience. They didn't choose to live in France, or they didn't choose to travel the world, or they didn't choose to get married. They chose the job instead, or whatever it is. And so sometimes it's hard to come to terms with that. And
it's that reality check of now I'm here midlife. I'm here at this point in my life, and there's really no going backwards.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's the sadness of the loss of all of those things.
Yeah. And that sadness, like a lot of uncomfortable truths that we come across in life, like we can deal with that sadness in a lot of different ways, productive ways. We can deal with that in unproductive ways. So what are some unproductive?
Well, one unproductive way to deal with sort of these limitations in our choices is by telling ourselves that we just don't have any other options. Like, oh, I'm sort of stuck here. And we try to convince ourselves that we're victims of our choices rather than agents of our own decisions. And this is not really helpful. And I like to add here that the people that we find who are living really abundant lives are the ones who are making the best out of the decisions and the choices that they've made.
Right. And I think the ones that are struggling are the ones that are thinking that they're stuck and not realizing that they actually have choice. I mean, I talk to people all the time that are like, I should have to choose my marriage. I should have to do this because of the kids or because of the finances or for whatever reason. They don't feel like they have that choice. And it's just, it's interesting because we talk about agency, we talk about free will, we talk about freedom, and we talk about how important these things are to us, how much we value these things. And yet we often avoid the responsibility that comes from actually exercising it and using it because it is sometimes painful to use our agency.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we want to avoid using it by letting someone else make the decision for us. I recently had a conversation with a client who was straddling a decision for a long time about whether to stay in a relationship or not. She'd been dating this particular person for a long time. Should she stay? Should she leave? She saw the red flags. And we talked a lot about what is your strategy for making decisions? How do you know when you trust your decisions? And she told me what her strategy is. She prays. She asks God for an answer. She looks for an answer from God. And if she doesn't get an answer immediately from God, then she starts looking for signs. And if she doesn't pick out a sign that she thinks is an answer, then she became really paralyzed and couldn't make a decision, wouldn't make a decision, didn't want to move forward. And I think sometimes, we want someone else or we want God to tell us what to do so we don't have to make the hard choice ourselves. And that doesn't mean I don't believe in the power of prayer. I actually really do. I think that we can pray for courage. We can pray for clarity, but I don't believe there's always a right path or an absolute wrong path. And nor do I think that God necessarily has a predetermined route for us that's going to keep us from experiencing life's struggles, life's discomforts, life's pain.
That wouldn't be fair, would it?
No, it's not how it really works.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we navigate this constantly ever changing life, we come to these forks in the road.
Yes, we do.
And we don't know which path is going to be smoother, which one's going to be more scenic. And even if we choose one and it turns out to be a wonderful journey, we'll never know what this other path might have offered. And truthfully, there probably would have been some wonderful aspects to it as well. Right. And we may even grieve the loss of those possibilities. Like, oh, well, now I'm here on this path. I look over and I see a canyon over there.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe that would have been different, but we can't stand in the fork forever, mired in indecision. And we can pause and we can gather information. We can take time to reflect, but eventually if we linger too long, we're choosing not to choose.
We're choosing. It's still a choice. That's the thing. Like even not choosing is a choice.
Choosing not to choose. Yeah. And we're stalling and we're trying to live in this fantasy that we can have both of these options. We can travel both of these paths. And that's not simply not true. And it's simply not living in reality. We have to choose.
Right. And I think that straddling position is what can be so detrimental in relationships. Like I can just stand here and not choose. So let's drill down just a little bit into the psychology of indecisions and ask, why do we actually avoid making choices? Why do we actually avoid making choices? Why do we avoid choosing our partner, choosing this person, choosing to move forward and work on the relationship? At the root of all indecisiveness in our life is one thing. It's the fear of regret. You're afraid of making the wrong decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you weren't afraid of making the wrong decision, then there actually would be no indecision. I mean, like you said a moment ago, I think there's time and a place where you collect data. Like, should I start this business? Should I take this job? And you want to take a moment to gather information.
Yeah. Weigh the pros and cons. We all do that as we should. Yeah.
Right. But if you weren't afraid of making the wrong decision, then decision would be easy.
Yeah. And I also think that it's important too, because maybe we've been conditioned that we have to be right. And I want to give social media a great shout out here, because the minute you make a decision on social media, there's a lot of people telling you that you're wrong. And we're in this world, and it's been going on for 5-10 years, where we feel like we need to make the right decision, or we'll be vilified, or we'll have less people that like us. So it's interesting when we talk about that, and I'll share one more experience in a minute. But
yeah, so the idea is really at the root of indecision is this fear of regret.
Yeah, and it's fear. It's also the fear of making the wrong decision. There exists that
the regret of making the wrong decision.
Yeah, and so I mean, if you don't believe us, let's try a quick experiment. Think of a decision that you're struggling with right now. Right?
Okay, got it.
So, got it. Okay, now flip a coin. Heads, you go with option A. Tails, you go with option B. Easy, right? Decision made.
Oh, I don't know if I like the way that feels.
Right? So, but you probably don't like that idea because, well, why not? Because indecision isn't about the choice itself. It's not about A or B. It's about worrying that what if the coin in this case picks the wrong decision, and now you've made the wrong decision.
Exactly. So what you're actually trying to do when you're stuck in indecision, what you're saying is you're trying to live a perfect life.
Yeah, you're trying to make the perfect decision out of two imperfect choices.
Which, as we talked about in the beginning, that's part of being human, right?
Yeah.
You can't live a perfect life. So
yeah, absolutely.
How do we then deal with indecision? Okay. It seems like indecision actually is something, as you mentioned, social media, maybe this is why it seems like indecision is getting actually worse in our society. And I think, like you alluded to, it's because we've started to believe in the rightness or the wrongness of a choice, and that rightness or wrongness comes from the decision itself.
Correct.
Rather than what it is that we do after making the decision.
Yeah. I think sometimes we feel like the decisions that we made are set in stone, and that's
too. Yeah. So a perfect example of this, let's talk about dating and picking a partner, picking a person that you want to spend your life with. So many people have this illusion that if I just check all the right boxes, if I find the right person, if I find my soulmate, then my relationship is going to be perfect. So we're trying to find the perfect person, assuming that the perfect person will lead to the perfect relationship, but that's not right. Right?
Absolutely not.
So here's a key piece of wisdom. It's not about the decision. It's about what you do after the decision that matters. That's the difference between an indecisive person and a decisive person. The indecisive person tries to pick the right choice, while the decisive person focuses on making whatever choice they pick work. And
even our language reflects this misunderstanding. We ask, like, is this the right choice, or is this the wrong choice? As if the rightness or the wrongness of that decision exists before the choice is really made. But in reality, right or wrong is determined by what follows after we make the decision. A decisive person understands this and focuses on creating a good outcome after the decision is made. So it's the decisive part.
So let's look at the opposite, the flip side of the coin, and let's look at what happens with someone who's indecisive. So a decisive person realizes it's not the choice that matters. It's what I do after the fact. What about the indecisive person? Well, they obsess over whether to choose option A or option B. Do I date this person? Do I not date this person? Do I marry this person? Do I not marry this person? Do I break up with this person? Do I not break up with this person? So they procrastinate and they agonize over making the right decision because they're assuming that the decision alone dictates their happiness, dictates their outcomes. When they then finally decide and pick and then, make a final decision after all this procrastination, their fear itself actually sets them up for a worse outcome.
Yeah.
For worse results, for less happiness, because they're committed, they're less committed to actually sticking with that decision and making it work after the fact. And then of course what happens after they've had an outcome, and when that outcome isn't great, what's their conclusion?
Oh, it was a bad decision.
Oh, it was the decision.
Yeah.
I made the wrong decision.
And then now I need to work harder at making better decisions in the future.
Exactly. So then they have a regret. I made a mistake. And then that regret sticks to them and they go to the next decision, they face the next one. And, oh, but I carried that trauma with me of that last past regret. And now that's front and center. And now I become even more indecisive. And then that perpetuates this happening again and again.
Yeah. And here's the point. You can't just make a choice and hope for the best, right? Mm-hmm. Hope is not a strategy. You can't make a decision and mentally check out thinking that, well, my work is done. I've made this decision. That's it.
And it was the right one. So I'm good to go.
You have to actively create something good from the decision that you made. Mm-hmm. And this is especially true in relationship. You need to learn the skills to nurture a great relationship. So again, it's not about the choice itself. It's about what you do after the choice that really matters. So when we talk about this in my work terms with the people that I hire, and oftentimes we'll see this with younger people, they're so afraid to make a mistake that they go slow. And we have a motto, and this just applies to work, not necessarily relationships, and the motto is hurry up and make mistakes because you can learn from them. But I don't necessarily want people to make mistakes. I just want them to realize that
it's okay to
make mistakes. It's okay to choose, because in the end, they make quicker decisions because they're freed from the guilt that comes from making the wrong decision, and they learn how to pivot just a little bit better.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So if you're struggling with this indecisiveness, like what can you do? Well, let's break it down into some easy go-to steps.
Right. Okay. So number one, as we've been talking about all episode, start by understanding that indecisiveness stems from a fear of regret. I'm afraid that I'm going to make this wrong choice, as if there actually is a wrong choice.
As if there actually is a wrong choice.
The hesitation isn't about the choice itself. It's worrying about whether or not you're going to make the wrong choice and then regret it later.
Yeah. Number two, next, realize that most of the time there is no inherently right or wrong choice, especially in the relationships. There's just the choice that you make. Each option will come with its own set of advantages and disadvantages, and the outcome isn't predetermined by the choice. It's shaped by what you do after you make that choice.
Right. Am I going to continue to work on my relationship and learn skills, learn communication, avoid losing strategies, put in some winning strategies? It's what I do after the fact that matters.
Absolutely.
And number three, lastly, embrace the fact, like Robert just talked about with his staff, like embrace the fact that you're going to make some mistakes. So hurry up and make them. Some decisions you make won't maybe be the most efficient. Maybe it'll take you a little longer to get there. Maybe you'll have to pivot. But here's the irony. And I think Robert just said this, but I think I'll say it again. The more open you are to making mistakes, the more you can fully commit to your decisions. And the more you fully commit to your decisions, the more you end up with better outcomes, because you're not weighed down by the fear of the regret and the trauma from your last your last decision that you felt like you made poorly.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. With this indecisiveness, like, make a choice and realize that there's always an option to change course or work on that decision further. It's rarely like a light switch on and off. You make a decision. There's always another decision and another path that follows that. It's a cascade of decisions and choices. It's not just one choice.
And you can pivot and be equally decisive about that particular pivot.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whether you're deciding, should I quit? Should I break up with this person? Should I stay in this relationship? Should I fully choose my spouse, even though they're imperfect? Whatever it is, just choose. No choice is permanent or unchangeable. So flip that mindset and you might be amazed at how your life can transform.
Yeah. And if we think about this from understanding that we all make mistakes, if we can give ourselves grace, then let's give our partners grace when they make a mistake or make a choice that is not ideal for us. If we can extend that grace to them, realizing that we're likely going to be the next person to make the mistake, if we extend grace, it's easier to pivot. If I had a harsh retort when I made a mistake with Charla, then I would be doubly afraid of making a mistake again next time. And I would be stuck in an indecisive pattern. Yeah. And I wouldn't be able to pivot and say, you know what, you're right. I made a mistake. I apologize. Let me move forward. And so, like, here's one final thought. You don't have to live a perfect life. It's not supposed to be perfect.
Right.
Life is full of these mistakes that we talked about. And those mistakes are part of what makes your life rich and enjoyable. It makes them amazing to be a human, because sometimes we take a decision to go down a path and it is rich and rewarding.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's rough road, and we learn things from those mistakes as well. So hurry up and make mistakes, small ones, hopefully.
Just make a decision.
Just make a decision.
Just choose.
Yeah, just choose.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're grateful for all of you. We kindly ask, if you haven't yet, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. It really does help us to get the show out, to make a bigger impact so that we can help more couples. And if you know someone who this episode might help, would you also please consider sharing it with them?
Yeah. And of course, be kind to each other this week. Take care of each other. And remember, it's the small things done often that make the biggest impact.
Until next time.